Yeah, I mean, exercise addiction is a funny thing. It's funny, like in some sense, having a sense of identity around something is really important, but you have to remember that it's pretend at the same time. That like whatever identity you have is constructed. Like it's good that you to have an identity, but the one you have is constructed either by others and or yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Wilson and I were talking about exercise addiction right before.
Right before we
Not
quit.
exercise addiction, addiction to identity issues with inside the exercising world, namely CrossFit or even triathlon.
Happens with a lot of stuff.
Everything, man. Every sport I've worked with, I mean, I see it.
See in the
It-
military, right? See
yeah,
what
it's
guys in the
yeah,
military.
it's the human condition. You know, part of the human condition because of the identity. I don't know that identity is necessary. Um, I can't. I cannot wholeheartedly say that I think identity is important. I think the idea of being like having an identity and being comfortable with the understanding of what that is important. But there are plenty of people throughout time who have literally tried to disassemble the identity problem because I think it fits perfectly into what we were just discussing about how this thing becomes an addiction. Like this thing becomes a problem because if you can't be a professional amateur world champion exerciser, whatever fucking sport you're in, your life falls apart. And it's like, that like I've had those problems. I've struggled with those things in the past. Not any not now, but it's this thing where we're so attached to who we are. And I mean, dude, that was the way to gold. Did you see it?
No, I haven't watched it yet.
Jeez.
I know I'm slow, man. It's been.
Jeez. I mean, you talk the top level, and it's like, here comes the disassemble.
I mean, you see it even with like executives too, right? This is who I am.
Yes.
I'm this hard charger, blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, but the problems you're describing to me are they are part and parcel of the identity that you've chosen for yourself. So you
Mhm.
then either have to accept that those things come with the identity you've chosen, or you have to shift how you identify yourself so that you can be rid of these problems. But you can't have your fucking cake and eat it too. That's not how this shit works. This is grown up talk. You got to change it or keep it. That's but it's up to you. Don't look at me. No, I'm sorry, Rob. I want to be able to do everything I want and have none of the problems. I'm like,
No, I
I
don't
don't know
want
what to
any.
tell
I don't
you.
want any of the consequences of hard charging being a prick.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing is like I've heard several people lately say how amazing the Last Dance was, right? Like the Jordan Chicago Bulls documentary,
I liked it.
and I I don't like it, but they were
Yeah.
like, yeah, like they were all about Jordan, and I'm like, so you didn't think that being a prick and alone are the this, and they're like, yeah, that's what it comes. That's what comes with being at the top. And I'm like, oh, so you can't be at the top unless you're a prick and you're alone.
And I mean, here's the thing. It's like I think we talked about this. We may have talked about this
And by the way,
before in some
I
sense.
actually think that Michael Jordan is probably the greatest athlete that's ever existed. Just to be clear.
Sure. And I mean, maybe it is being part of, I don't know, whatever the top means. And that's what each person has to decide what that means for them. Some people the top means being the best, like being the best husband. Some people it means it kind of goes back
Mhm.
to the like what's my if you choose whatever given identity, then you have to take the good with the bad. And I don't necessarily, identity from a psychological perspective is about being able to delineate oneself from the rest of the world. That's in psychological development. That's what it is, right? Like as you come out of early childhood, you start to delineate yourself from others in the rest of the world. But if that's where you stop, right? And I think the other, so it's like goes one of two ways. A lot of times people either glorify the athlete who's like, to hell with everyone and everything, and I will run over whoever or whatever in order to achieve what I am focused on. Or they glorify, look at this monk who's unattached and has no self, and that's the perfect, beautiful way to be. And it's like, well, yeah, except they don't have any relationships. So do you want
Mhm.
that? Because if you want no
Or they
self,
participate in society.
they don't participate in the cult. They've separated themselves from culture. They don't have to deal with the problems of standard culture. They don't have to deal with the problems of a marriage. So they don't have. It's not either glorification on either end of the spectrum, and the whole spectrum comes with ups and downs. It's like, well, just choose the one you want. And it's kind of like I told you before, that Jordan Peterson quote: "You pick your poison, but you don't get to not have a poison."
Hmm.
And it's like
Yeah.
that is such a
Yeah, I think this is why, when I think about this, it's like, this is why I like people like, or athletes like Bodie Miller, who just literally didn't want to do it by other, by the USOC's rules or the national team's rules or whatever, and was kind of a cowboy being authentic in a lot of cases. And although that came across as him being a prick, that was actually him saying, no, this is who I am. I'm not going to change that. And here's a guy who loved what he did, right? Like, absolutely loved what he did in skiing. But yet got beaten up as a result of, not getting in line, right? I don't know.
there's there's always this dance, right, between like an order, like orderliness and hierarchies, and pure creative expression and
Mhm.
creativity on the other hand. And I think when we have an issue is when people try to claim that one is necessarily better than the other. And the real
Yes.
question is, which one do I resonate with? I resonate with, I like to know that there's a given outcome, that there's rules, that we compete inside of these rules, that everybody's agreed upon, and we get after it. And I have made a conscious choice to participate in that sport culture and those rules. And some people are creative, like Bodie Miller, Tony Hawk, Laird, like that are just like,
Yeah.
to hell with all that. I'm gonna do it my way. But to
Yeah. I mean,
know
that,
that,
that, yeah.
it's like,
Extreme sports, action sports tend to have these types of people.
for sure, because they're pushing the edge of what is possible. Like they're trying to figure out what has no one like has what has nobody thought of yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's why I've speculated why you've seen the increases in performance in these sports at the rates you see versus you see in things like working sports,
Yeah,
because it becomes more of this, uncreative process of, I shouldn't say uncreative, maybe just the authentic side of it just kind of disappears to some
there's
regard.
there's less rules, right? Just by
Yeah.
the nature. So it's like inside of, for example, like professional basketball, there's some really interesting like creativity that goes on, but it's within some pretty fine parameters because there's known rules of the game that are
Mhm.
standard. But when you look at like Kyle Lenny and what he's doing on big waves, it is a whole different level of creativity because there's no rules. I mean, the rule essentially is don't die, right? But other than that, you go out there and do whatever you want. And
Uh, yeah, dying is the outcome of this if done incorrect. Well, if not paying attention close,
that's right.
right?
So, but other than that, nobody's out there going, "Oh, you get this amount of points," or you know what I mean? Like you get, um, we'll score you less for this, or there's a penalty on the tour if you do X, Y, Z. And again, it's not good, bad, or otherwise. It's just the the path for creativity is is wide open and is dictated only by the natural environment. And that's how, a lot of extreme sports tend to operate. It's just the environment makes the rules. There's no arbitrary rules made by people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I tend to like extreme. I put MMA in an extreme sport category, even though there's some pretty strict rules. But I mean, you look at how creative, like the evolution of MMA in the last
Yeah.
20 years. It's like,
Don't bite, don't kick in certain like
yeah,
it's not that, there's not that. I mean,
no, I
use
mean,
any technique you want in order to win.
totally. And here's the thing too, is like, I can remember when people are like, spin kicks will never work. You'll get knocked out. And now it's like guys are doing like jump spinning back kicks and knocking other guys out with it. They found a way to work it into the totality of the game, but it's just the environment, anyway, for me personally, my personality is like you, like I tend to go towards where is the maximized level of creativity, because that's what my personality type sees
Mhm.
value in.
Mhm.
Um, and not so much in standard sports. Like, it never interested me that much. And I just think it's really personality driven. So when you look at something like The Weight of Gold or The Last Dance, some kid who's watching that, who is like super competitive driven, like I want to be the best, and like they're going to be like, yeah, Jordan, and they're going to hang his jersey up on the wall, and everybody else can fuck off. I'm going to practice. I'm going to bounce this basketball 10,000 times a day. Right. But then you might wake up one day and be like, shit, I don't have any friends.
Mm.
And that it's,
Yeah.
and you might be okay with it.
And I'm not here to tell you it's not okay or
That's
it is okay.
right.
Like,
That's right.
are you okay with it? But this is where that, yeah,
Exactly. Are you
yeah,
okay with it? Because it's a
yeah.
choice you
This
made.
is the hardest fucking thing about coaching and mentoring people right now. Like, like I've really had to really get people to understand I don't give a fuck which direction you go. Just understand that the direction you choose comes with these things.
That's right. Well, that's because people, if they can talk you into giving them a value for what direction, then they abdicate part of the responsibility for the choice. Oh, well, Brian McKenzie is an expert, and he told me that he liked this way better. He indicated through some words or gesture that this way was better for me. So if I choose that and then it doesn't go out, I can abdicate some of that and be resentful of Brian and say, "Oh, Brian told me." That's people, and we all fall into traps like that, where we want to abdicate some responsibility and say, "Well, just you tell me what to do," right? Instead of just being willing to fall flat on our faces and go, "Oh man, I chose wrong this time. I did it. Let's move on to the next thing," And
Mm-hmm.
it's sad, because it's also where people give up the most power. Like, that's where you also have the most power. Where you're the most vulnerable and you're the most powerful are often like a razor's edge from each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, it's funny. I had this, because you started off with exercise addiction, right? Like,
mhm.
and I was actually having this conversation this morning, Tyler. It just popped up because she finally watched this thing by Gabor Mate. It's this little cartoon. It's like an animated presentation on addiction, because he's done such an incredible job with breaking down what addiction is, and he's not saying what addiction isn't, right? Like, it's like, look, it we've made it this thing where we literally talk about it like it's this genetic thing that gets passed on, and that's why you're a drug addict or alcoholic. And he's like, that's not true. But it's not true. Like, you know, like the fact is, and this is where I've been able to go with it, is everybody needs and wants to regulate their nervous system. Dopamine is a part of our entire day, and identity has been filled through our lives. And so with like exercise is a no-brainer like if you get involved in a sport or training in some or a practice and that becomes this addictive pattern, just understand that that comes with consequences. Like you said, like pick your, that's your poison you've picked. What are the consequences of this? And it's like addiction inevitably becomes something where when it becomes destructive, right? It's not doing me any, it's doing me more harm per se than it is good. And I wouldn't even say that. I'd say it's doing some harm, right? Like some real harm, maybe not even half, maybe just times it's doing some real harm, because like I'm maxed out, but I've got to go do my workout. And that inevitably sends me over the fucking edge and I pop and I get sick or something happens, whatever, I break something or, you know, whatever.
Well, look, how many times in like the course of being a coach or in your mentorships have you heard the sentence, I don't feel good unless I fill in the blank?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be any number of things.
Well, let me tell
right?
you, I'll give you two, I'll give you top three things with the people that I work with. Endurance sport, CrossFit, or Wim Hof breathing.
Yeah. It's like, I don't
Why
feel
is it those three things? Even though like, look, this is kind of the world I've worked in, but like, I don't get this from baseball players, right? Like I'm not, you know, like these people have the most amount of recovering addicts or alcoholics or people who've dealt with addiction issues in them.
Yeah, because they get a dopamine flood, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
endorphin flood,
Yeah.
right? During the training. And
Yeah.
it's like even guys at jiu-jitsu, like, man, I don't feel good unless I get into train. I'm like, well, what happens if you don't get in? Like we had a you know, COVID shutdown. We've had COVID shutdowns and training just like everybody else. I'm like, so during that whole time you didn't feel good? That sucks, because you don't have any say over whether the school's open or not.
Mm-hmm.
So like, why would you put all of your chips on something you have no say over?
Yeah.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's no
What,
good.
why give up power?
Yeah.
Why
Even
give up power?
I mean,
I mean, but these are all things, just so we're clear, I've
oh,
gone through.
of
Like,
course,
this was my fucking life, right? Like,
right.
yeah,
We it's not it's not pointing the finger. It's looking in the mirror.
no, it's just this is all about looking in the mirror. But it's just funny
But
because it's like, no, we don't like, we really don't like looking in the mirror.
no, well, and it even happens with like breath work, right? Like people are like, man, if I don't get my breath work in, I'm just man, I'm just not the same. And you know, it's obviously a tool that we like a lot, but I mean, if you have to have it in order to feel good, and you miss the boat, like you didn't, the lesson was not complete because it's a tool, right? So
Yeah,
it's just it's interesting, man, with the you know how quickly a walking stick becomes a crutch.
yeah, yeah. A lot of crutches. I have just even like time. It's been this thing in the past with me. It's like I've really broken down like, oh, my desire and need to want to go to bed and eat at specific times. And if that gets fucked with, things get messed with. Like,
Yeah, dude,
I'm like,
that's why
wow, that's
that's why I don't,
fragile.
for me, exactly, it's fragile. That's why I don't
Yeah.
like to do you know, meal prep measurement and stuff like that. And I get it, if
Mhm.
you're in a weight cutting sport or you're bodybuilding or something like that, hey man, it might be part of what you've chosen. But for me, I don't want to be like when I done the did you ever do back in the day the zone? Did you ever do the zone?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
So I did the zone, and I was like, my blood sugar was regulated so fucking finely that like if I missed my little window, I would start.
Pop.
And I'm like, oh, that's because I'm doing a diet that was made for diabetics, and I'm not one. This doesn't make any damn bit of sense. And and I was like, I don't like being this fragile, and I don't like being so fragile that I can't like, if I eat a donut and it's not my cheat time, oh my, I might lose like 0.002% of my self-perceived performance for the day. It's like, for Christ's sakes, like at some point you have to ask yourself, like, what am I doing this for? And again, I understand that it's good, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be super goal driven, and might be a matter of personality to be that conscientious about your food. But at some point, I think it's really unnecessary, and it creates an unhealthy psychological cycle for human beings. And no matter what kind of athlete you are, or how driven you are, or whatever, you're a person first. You're human,
Yeah.
right? And then everything else is on top of that.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
I mean, wrestlers have some of the most unhealthy relationship with food you're ever gonna see, where they
Yeah.
don't even want to eat because they just don't want to cut it. They're just like, fuck,
Yeah.
if I eat that, I know I need to refuel, but oh man, I'm gonna have to cut that. Like, nah, nothing I've ever had to deal with because I've been heavy for a long time.
I mean, I have never, I mean, I maybe, you know, I've spent very little time in like calorie restriction type stuff, like, but
I mean, I fasted just because I wanted to know what it was. I like that's another, like, I don't want to be controlled by having to eat. Sometimes when I'm
yeah,
hungry, I'll make myself wait a little longer just because, like, no, like, there's other shit to do right now. It's kind of like, how it is when we were traveling super heavy. When you're traveling, sometimes you might not eat in the morning, and you might not eat until everything is done that day, which might mean like 6 or 7 p.m. And you got to be sharp. You got to be firing on all cylinders. And then we'd eat like 3 dinners, right? At the end of the day. But
you'd eat 3 dinners.
I would eat 3 dinners. Yeah. But even then, it's like not not having to, like, oh, if I don't have my special meal or the snack or whatever, like, I can't function. It's like, yeah, I don't want to be that fragile in anything. And something also, even like Oxley and I were talking about last time I saw him, is like the double-edged blade of discipline, and like how it's like there's this big movement, like, got to be disciplined. You see like Goggins and Jocko, and for sure there's some people who need to like get their ass kicked and like, hey, get up and do what you need to do. But for me, it's like at some point the tail wags the dog, and I'm gonna be like, I don't want to be disciplined just for the sake of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what's funny is I heard someone in the discipline culture talking about, who's very all about discipline. And they were talking about how every time they go on vacation or go to do something, they get sick within the first 2 days.
Hmm.
And I was like, it's a pretty good sign that discipline that discipline thing is keeping some fairly high sympathetic tone. Because the
Yeah.
moment you don't have, like, the moment you come off, your immune system finally goes, oh fuck, finally, like,
Finally.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Again, pick your poison. You just
pick
don't get
your
to not have
poison.
one.
Yeah,
It's all, things fall apart.
they do. What do you want? Make
That is
sure.
that is the question. Like, when it comes
Mhm.
down to it, well, what do you want?
Mhm.
And people are like, I don't know. And it's like, well, then I don't know what to tell you. You have to know what you want. You know, sometimes sometimes you have to just start practicing, and what you want will reveal itself, because a bunch of stuff you don't want will happen, and you'll go, no, 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 no. Well, then you'll figure out what you do want, and you can move towards it. Unfortunately, that's how we work, is through process of elimination. And then about the time
Ain't
you
that the
figure
truth?
you really get it figured out, you're like, oh man, I'm way closer to dying. Shit.
Shit.
They need to hurry up and get that altered carbon technology cracking. You watch that show on Netflix, Altered Carbon?
No.
What? I haven't watched the second season yet. The first season's pretty dope. It's kind of like a sci-fi noir setting, but essentially they're in this technological age where your your consciousness can get extracted through a chip in your body, and then you can get it inserted into another body. And so like wealthy people in this particular sci-fi thing, some of them are like 800 years old, and they've just like amassed massive amounts of wealth and stuff. And then people don't have as much money, don't get as good of bodies, and it's pretty, they have all these upgrades. It's pretty cool. But essentially they figured out a way to remove consciousness from the body in a physical form and then reinsert it into a new body.
Hmm.
Pretty crazy. And then like if you get in trouble and you're in prison, then they just take your consciousness out and like stick it in a hard drive, and you're in like a consciousness prison.
Jesus.
Yeah, don't show that shit to Jeff Bezos.
He's probably already working on it, bro.
He probably already lives in a hard drive, man.
Maybe. Maybe.
All right, well,
There's 30.
it's good. It's close enough for government work. I think we covered a lot. Our conversation speed was pretty high today.
Hmm.
We were high RPM today. All right,
Yeah.
everybody. Thanks for listening to us ramble.
Thank you, people.
We'll see you next time.
Ciao.